airplane on Friday heading down to the Dallas Cowboy Vikings game
Oh,
Oh,
really?
you lucky person.
over the weekend. So that's what I'll be doing for Veterans Day.
Goal.
As always, there's tons of events going on throughout our community. There's free meals on Veterans Day. There should be no one that goes hungry, that's for sure. I was approached by the Assemblies of God Church. A new event this year that they're putting on is they're having donuts and coffee at Cashwise this Veterans, on Veterans Day in the morning for our veterans and their families. And they said, how many donuts should we order? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. So they ordered 500 donuts and they hope to have a good turnout there. So if you know of anyone, send them over that way. A new event started last year, and I'm not sure if all of you are aware of it, but our office has been approached a lot, and if there's events throughout the community that aren't at a VFW, a Legion, or a bar. So Ron Lindstrand and myself started a coffee with veterans every first and third Monday over at the community center. It goes from 9:30 to 11. Then we had some younger veterans approach us and say, well, I work. So now we're doing it every fourth Monday evening from 6 to 8 over at the community center. So it's a good way. We really do get a huge turnout, and it's a great event. There's no program. It's just for veterans to have coffee and donuts and mingle and get to know each other. So it's really worked out well. Our office is working again this year, and I've sent out a couple of emails on our Thanksgiving baskets for veterans. Every year, Genio donates 88 turkeys, and then we team up with the VFW Auxiliary, and they buy all the fixings to make a Thanksgiving meal. We still have 8 baskets left because I send out the postcards, and then I get phone calls. I didn't get a postcard, so I always save about 15 of them once postcards go out. So if someone's out there that needs one, then they can get a meal. So if any of you know of anyone that is in need, send them my way, please. We are doing open mic on November 7th with a couple of my Veterans Advisory Board members. So that's coming up on Thursday. John Lindstrand obviously has his Veterans Display November 10th through the 12th over at the City Auditorium. We've been working, and this has been very, very stressful for every veteran as well as a veteran service officer, this new VA Community Care Act, where you get a letter in the mail saying you can now go anywhere and be seen. And that's not the case. I mean, you can be seen locally, but you still have to get it pre-authorized. So we are still seeing a lot of people bringing bills in that the VA did not pre-authorize. You can appeal it. It's a long process because those appeals go out to Montana, and I don't know if you all have watched the news. They like to hit the big deny stamp before they like to look at the claims. So
Who originated the letters then? The confusing letter came from who? The VA then?
yeah, the VA sent. My husband and I both received a letter saying you can go anywhere you want and be seen. And I like to think that I'm pretty knowledgeable, and the way I read the letter means I can walk into ACMC or Cares Health now and be seen, and the VA is going to pay for it. And I just came back from training up at the St. Cloud VA yesterday. It still has to be pre-authorized.
And the letter does not communicate that
The letter does not communicate that at all.
My question for you, Trish, is it possible for you as a VSO to send any kind of communication to the constituents and the clients that you have clarifying that? Or does that result in more confusion or?
Well, of course, everyone that walks through our door calls, but they're being told. I have a radio ad, and then I also have an ad that's going out for Veterans Day in the West Central Tribune that indicates the real true facts of the Community Care Act. I can tell you from my personal experience that they denied my finger surgery after they approved it. I was at home laying in my bed recovering, and they called me on the phone and said, yeah, by the way, we're not paying for your surgery that 2 hours ago we told you we were. So And that went nowhere. I ended up just having to pay it. So,
So, Mr. Chair,
Roger,
is
please.
that something that's happening all over?
yes.
Okay, so is our delegation in Washington aware of this?
We have a president of our association, and he's been working hard on working with the state officials to try to get this fixed, get the wording fixed.
But it's a state thing
Well,
or
the state,
national thing?
the state people are connecting with the federal people. It's just unfortunate because if you're 80, 90 years old and you're looking at this letter,
No.
you're not going to understand. I mean, I'm 45 and I don't,
Right.
the way
Roger
I
can
read
relate.
it.
Huh? You can relate.
Yeah, I'm 45 too.
Yeah,
No, 80 or 90.
It's age appropriate, huh?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't think it should be the 80 or 90-year-olds that are right. I think we need to have, even our local legislative delegation bring this to the attention, get a little more pressure put on it than, individuals sending these letters, even if it requires a resolution from us.
Yeah.
To bring more attention to it. I would do the same thing, but I think to Commissioner Madsen's point that, very brief, very short, even a note card size thing from you saying, here's what you do when you get these, or what you need to do before you have surgery would go a long ways. Because a lot of times they have an advocate that's helping them.
I think some type of communication is imperative in order, and if it takes a resolution from this board and the contact with the local legislators in the states, because if it's only one person, if you're that one person, it's pretty doggone important, and it's obviously thousands of people that are affected on this. It's,
well, you would think that I would know how to
Right.
handle my own appeal, and I fought and fought and fought, and a year after,
nobody should be placed in that position.
No.
Mr. Klein.
Maybe you can do a story with all the local newspapers also. It's, a lot of our veterans do read the paper and so.
Yeah.
I contacted Care 11, they never got back to me because they had been doing all these stories on veterans that have had appeal, or, their care denied, so.
I can concur too. They need a heads up before they move on with.
Well, let's do our best to get the communication out through there and working with the press and the media to get some information out. Keep us informed on that, please.
I will.
Thank you, Trish.
Trish, is there a meeting coming up next week?
It's not,
Advisory?
we're gonna wait till after Veterans Day because I'm leaving town.
You're going to the Vikings.
Right, yeah, we addressed some of these concerns. We talk at the advisory meeting, we have quarterly with the other veterans, officers of the different organizations in town, veteran service organizations, but I'm glad that we took the recommendation of being on open mic to explain that, so good luck with that. And who's going to be on open mic tomorrow with you?
Dell and Al Kelm and Dell Bjerkevet.
Okay, good, thank you.
And you're welcome to come if you'd like.
I'm not a vet.
I just wanted to say how long ago was this letter mailed?
I will look at home because I have it. I want to say we both received them 3 weeks ago.
And it really, what it says is you can go to any doctor anytime and be treated as a veteran.
Yep.
It seems to me to be so simple that a letter could say, you can go and get treated for your conditions at any provider, provided that you get prior authorization. That's a one-sentence thing. What is so hard about that? I just don't get it. And the bureaucracy sometimes drives me nuts. That should never have happened, and anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I agree.
Good too, then.
Proceed with your best, and then if there's something that would assist, we'll help.
Okay, I
Thank you,
will
sir.
definitely try to get a resolution made up.
Okay, proceed, please.
We are working every year. We pick a family that's struggling to help their family with Christmas. And we have located a veteran who just went through a pretty nasty divorce and has custody of his 3 small children, and that's the family that we have this year. So what we do is we go out to the local clubs, we drop off lists of items that they are in need of or want for toys. And we sponsor that one family, and every year it's huge. I mean, there's tears because of all the stuff that the community helps this family out with. Another interesting note is that the Blue Water Navy veterans, which are Vietnam veterans that served offshore in Vietnam, can now enroll into the VA for healthcare, assuming that they've been exposed to Agent Orange. So yesterday in St. Cloud at our training, we were told that any Navy veteran that served offshore in Vietnam can enroll in the VA for healthcare. So we'll be getting the word out on that as well, because they, in the past, have been denied. And they can also apply for any diseases associated with Agent Orange, and we've done a ton of them. We haven't seen any of them go through, but they have to research and see where all these ships, they have to look at the ship logs and see where they were off of Vietnam.
Roger?
Does that include the Coast Guard?
No. Well, yeah, if you were within a mile.
Okay.
Off of, yep. I'm sorry, yes, it does. The VA had a lot of changes this year with, they changed every single form, I think. And I've been here 13 years, and now all of a sudden, it's like learning your job all over again. And with that, they also are sending all the forms to Janesville, Wisconsin to be scanned in, which is really causing delays. I just got off the phone with a veteran, did a simple claim 6 months ago and still hasn't heard anything. So it's frustrating for the veterans, it's frustrating for us. Hopefully they'll get it straightened out. But if you hear any complaints, that's what's happening. But other than that, things are going smoothly. Annabeth's getting all trained in and she's doing really well. So that's my report.
Any questions for Tricia?
Well, Tricia, you mentioned the 13 different pages or forms. Is that long-term, or in the future, once you get through the adjusting of the change, is this a benefit and it's an improvement for the veterans? Do you think the form or the process or the benefits?
I would say yes, once everything gets straightened out.
Okay.
The hardest part is for us knowing exactly which forms to submit correctly, especially when it comes to appeals. But we have people to help us with that, so.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Larry?
So as Trish was saying, her office has been working really hard on trying to improve services. So Annabeth Black, who's her assistant, has now been trained. And so if Trish happens to be out of the office, if a veteran comes in, she can help start the process of the forms. And so this way, the veterans that can get that care as quick as possible. And so they've been going through a lot of training and a lot of stuff. And so, but I think it's a betterment for services for all of our veterans.
Mr. Chair. You know, I think what we're really talking about here is a navigator, and I understand that. I mean, we just went through open enrollment, and I will be qualifying for Medicare this year, and my wife is not, and it takes a navigator to understand all that stuff. So, you know, the more you can do to help them navigate those waters, the better off they will be.
Well, we certainly know that, and Director Lieber will talk about in corrections, the victim assistance coordinators and all that with the criminal justice system as well. An example, very complicated, you know, the forms that you have. And if you want to be a farmer, Trish, you can fill out thousands of papers as well.
I'm married to one.
Yes, I know that. I know that. So you understand paperwork and forms when you go to the FSA office, and you understand that. Jenny, the forms are different monthly. And just get yourself acclimated that you're going to learn something brand new again at that point.
Every day you learn something new.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck. I will now call on Director Lieberg for the remainder of the agenda, and Tammy, please proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So I have a couple things on the agenda today. We'll start with what I've been trying to do with the success story statistics, and then I want to talk about our Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act County's legislative platform for 2020. So to start with, the success story. So I selected, actually, the person that my staff we selected for this week was actually going to speak at our advisory board next week, but due to a medical thing, she's not able to. I'm hoping to bring her in January. So for those of you on the advisory board, I'd like to have some more success stories coming forward. And have them tell you the story themselves. So I'm just going to give you a little brief snippet. The success story right now, one of our probationers was discharged successfully last week. This is an interesting case. She was placed on probation for a drug offense in 2016. She was actually, after a probation violation, went into drug court. Violated out of drug court in 2018, so she was not successful in drug court at all. They sent her back to my office, and in March of 2018, or December of 2018, she started working on a program with her probation officer, doing homework in specific Hazelden treatment programs, different cognitive behavioral programs, and different things. Since that time, she's had 37 clean tests. She's maintained sobriety for 2 years. She obtained employment and was promoted and got a management position. She has since had to leave that position because of a medical issue, but now is in college. She's kept her kids at home and done lots of really positive changes in her life and is moving forward. So as of last week, the judge signed her discharge papers and she's no longer on probation. So hopefully you will get the opportunity to meet her at a later date, but wanted to kind of bring that forward as we go forward. She has very, very positive things about her experience on probation and had multiple violations and failures on probation before the last success. So it's an interesting story. So statistics. I put the statistics in front of you just for October 2019. As I talked about, I'm trying to change this around a little bit and provide a few more different information about things. This time you'll see a little bit differently. We'll start with the new offenders cases. So new offenses, and types. So new offenders, in October, we had 66 new cases come onto our probation caseload this month. You can see the list of some of the different types of cases that we had started on probation this month, just this month. And you'll see, and at the end of the year, I'll give you the longer list. We also completed 163 reports and assessments. That's including bail bond studies, discharges, domestic abuse assessments, PSIs, and transfers in and out between interstate and between the counties. I did use our 2018 October numbers. You can see between our client and case statistics. In October 30th, 2019, that is a snapshot that we had 1,556 probationers on probation on that date. That same date a year ago, we were almost exactly the same at 1,568. So it's pretty close. The difference under case statistics, if you remember, as I discussed before, many of our offenders might have more than one case open at any given time. And so that's why we see different numbers. When somebody has more than one case, it is more work because we have to manage multiple different things with them. So we do keep track of it that way. So on October 30th, we had 2,002 open cases at my office. The next piece that is the new addition, as we've been trying to talk about our different evidence-based practices and probation and trying to figure out new ways to bring that forward and discuss those with you. So part of that process is our computer program tracks through our chronological record the different types of homework and work we're doing with our offenders specifically. And so when we talk about criminogenic needs, those are the needs that a probation officer is going to attempt to address that affect recidivism. Through research that we have found that if we address those needs, we can reduce the recidivism of the offender. I pulled the statistics out of our chronological record, and you can see that our probation officers at 40% of their time is spent on alcohol and drugs. That isn't a big surprise as we talk about that being a huge piece of what people are dealing with, and kind of a driving force behind getting in trouble. But the other things are also big drivers behind that, and dealing with antisocial attitudes, antisocial patterns of behavior, antisocial peers, education and employment, family and marital, leisure and recreation. Those are all things that we're looking at to try and address to reduce those criminogenic needs. Now, one of the things you can see here is We obviously didn't market much for antisocial peers. I think part of that is just it's one of those really difficult things to address and probably isn't marked as often in the computer program. So we're going to look and see if that's a place where we can increase some of our efforts in terms of reducing those criminogenic needs. Some of the most difficult ones, as you can imagine, are antisocial attitudes and antisocial behaviors. How do we address those through our probation appointments? And that is really dealing with cognitive behavioral approaches, sending homework, doing role plays with our offenders. My probation officers in their appointments will literally sit down and say, hey, if one of your, for example, on an antisocial, they'll sit down and they'll say, if somebody approaches you and offers you things, how are you going to react to this? What are you going to do? And they walk through that process with them to give them the skill set to try and say no and move forward. One of the other things that we've done in the last couple months that if you get an opportunity to see, I know a couple of you I've walked through, is we took our storage room in our probation office and created a women's moving on group room. And actually, the women are in the room right now. It's one of our group days. But later on, if you wanted to walk through, you can see it. They actually have posters up, different activities and things that they're working on. They've really kind of made it their own space. And that's where they're working on the cognitive behavioral programming. They spend 2.5 hours twice a week in the room with 2 probation officers and work on real live skills. Some of it's parenting, some of it's relationship skills, problem-solving skills, all the different things to try and reduce that recidivism, things that evidence has shown us to do. So if you have any questions, let us know. Any questions about statistics? Going forward, okay?
Mr. Chair, I had a question on one of the first things you talked about with the success story. So that person failed out of drug court,
That is correct.
and then you guys were, what made the difference? Was there one thing, or was it, I mean,
So in this case, I would let her make that discussion a little bit more when we have that opportunity. But I have not actually met her myself. But my understanding of reading the paperwork, it's really about relationship building, about how do you develop that relationship and in giving that encouragement and motivation for a person to move forward.
from the PO?
From the PO. And so it was actually, my understanding in this case, that they actually really developed a pretty strong working relationship that enabled them to provide both positive and negative feedback and moving forward into what was going on. And some of it is some of the practices that we've implemented in the last year and a half, including like our cognitive groups, our one-on-one cognitive behavioral programming things, and the different things that probably weren't as much of an effort during the drug court. I mean, there's just different things. And so not every practice or everything we do works for every individual. We have to find what works best for that individual. And in this case, the one-on-one time an individual work she did with her probation officer is really kind of what hit home.
Thank you.
I have a question. Have you ever done any research, Tammy, or people at work maybe above your level as far as statistics on at what point and stage in a person's life were they impacted with this behavioral problem, or has that been exposed? The reason why, it started at maybe something traumatic, maybe upbringing, who knows, there's all kinds of reasons that cause people to have that mental health issues, just who they are, where they're designed. And I'm just wondering, how do you, I know at the school system, we try to deal with that a lot, they're educating kids, and behavioral adjustment when they find it's inappropriate. But are there any statistics that show where it started or where the majority of the issues started from?
So twofold your question, okay? So there's lots and lots of research out there that talks about how the ACEs studies and different things, trauma has affected individuals all the way through. So the trauma they experienced early on in their life, in their childhoods, has a significant impact on what's happening to them later on in life. We do know that, the higher the ACEs score, not only just health factors like obesity or chemical dependency or mental illness, but also criminal activity. Has a significant impact on that. But there's also a lot of other things. So when we talk about criminogenic needs, that research actually is really geared towards what what we know about criminal offenders and how they led their lives. And I would tell you, most of the people that we work with are good people that just made bad choices, you know, and they don't have the skill set to make those choices. And that's why we're trying to get through that process. So the research that we look at right now talks about exactly the list on the things that I just gave you on the statistics is what leads people to crime. It may be different it is different between men and women. Different pathways for women than there is for men that leads them to crime. But it also, a lot of times, how significant that crime is and how we get them out of it depends on how long they've been in it. And those factors, those criminogenic risk factors, are what we look at through research, is there alcohol and drugs, which actually isn't always the driver. It's a little bit confusing, I'm probably going way down into the weeds, because a lot of times that's what we see as the issue, is the alcohol and drug use. But the reality is a lot of times, kind of like you said, the ACEs, the trauma, the mental health, there was something that happened first. It's just that the alcohol and drugs is what they're kind of self-regulating with. And that's what we see that tends to be what we see. So what we really need to address is that antisocial attitudes, the antisocial behaviors, the antisocial peers. Those are the things that really get at the heart of things. And who we hang around with has a significant impact on what we do. So that's a big one. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it did. It's just fascinating when you research in your job. I know we're limited in what we can do as county commissioners, but it's good to know what you're working on and how you're approaching it. And it gives me comfort knowing that you're dealing with trying to find out the root of the problem with each individual, because I'm sure it's quite a nightmare trying to decipher that type of information. But that ultimately is what you need to address, is how you can affect it.
And that is one of the biggest changes of what probation looks like today compared to what probation looked like in the 70s or the 80s or 90s, is the research behind how we change behavior is what drives what we do today. We really make a big difference. And we've seen significant improvements and changes of how how offenders, we can reduce the recidivism risk, which ultimately is our goal of public safety. Bringing it all the way back around, because if we can reduce the recidivism, the more we improve our public safety.
The same type of thing applies, Tammy, as you well know, with healthcare, with education, whether the programs in family services or whatever, public health. It is finding out what works for that individual or that family structure, or whatever it is, because everybody's different. There's no cookie cutter approach.
Nope.
I forget what the song from the 50s and 60s, but boxes of ticky-tacky.
Oh,
You know, we're not all the same. Remember that song? I'm probably too old. You don't
You
remember
are.
that, Roger? You should remember
Yeah,
that.
I'm sorry. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Anyway, proceed, Tammy, please.
okay. So the next thing on my agenda was I wanted to talk about our legislative platform. And when I say MACAC, I need to explain what that is. It's Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act Counties. We are a member because we're a Community Corrections Act county. I sit on the executive board at the state level and then also on the legislative committee. So that's one of these things that's really close to my heart. This is kind of my driver when I'm working on our state committees. Right now, our focus this year is what I wanted to talk about. So there's two pieces to this. The main focus that I know you guys have heard me talk about a bunch, but we're gearing up for the legislative season and really need everybody's assistance to take a look at this. So I really want to explain how this impacts our county and our communities, and why it's so important to address. And then I'll also just briefly, because of time, probably go through our legislative policy positions briefly. But if you have any specific questions about that, I know some of them can be a little different and why we make those recommendations. We'll kind of go through that real briefly as well. So we've talked a lot in the past about the fact that the way the delivery systems and community corrections are funded, the legislature right now, we talk about CCA, CPO, and DOC. Okay, so we are community corrections, which is CCA. There's CPO, which is county probation offices, and then there's Department of Corrections. Each county has the ability to pick which one they are, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what that means for each one. The state has an obligation to help fund each delivery systems, but the county picks which one they choose to. We are CCA. Some of our neighbors are DOC, and some of them are CPO.
For the public, can you tell them what the acronyms are if they're watching on TV?
Yes, so again, community corrections, CCA is community corrections, CPO is county probation office, and DOC is Department of Corrections. What that means is, so for example, Department of Corrections, actually, we'll go through, I'm jumping ahead. So legislature, the primary issue here is the legislature has been underfunding county probation and CC and community corrections. It has a significant impact on our county budgets and how we're going to be able to affect in terms of public safety and providing evidence-based supervision for the offenders in our communities. They live here, they're part of where we're at, it's something we have to do. So, delivery systems. I have the acronyms again that I use are CCA, DOC, CPO. If you can see these, I should have had it a little bit bigger. The main thing that we're looking at here is community corrections. Like we said, that's us. So we provide 72% of the supervision practices in the state of Minnesota. A lot of people forget that actually since Department of Corrections is bigger, that they don't actually provide a lot of the community services. CCA actually provides the majority of it, and I'll show you a map here that kind of gives you an idea where the different services are. Department of Corrections, so CCA, we provide all probation and supervised release, which a lot of people think of as parole in the state of, in our county. So from juveniles to misdemeanors to felony offenders to supervised release, our community corrections provides those services. We also provide a lot of the rehabilitative services, the pre-sentence investigations, the different things that are required by the court. And then we have things like we can add to different parts of our program based on our community values and what we choose. And in our community here, what we're doing is we have 7 STS work crews that go out. We're one of the few places in our state that have the work crews that we do that do the things that we put together. The advantage of CCA is that we have the ability to put all of these things into what we want. We have local control, we make the determination. As long as we provide the basic level services, we can expand out from there. And that is what we're choosing to do as a community here. But we're funded from a variety of different places. So we have state funding, because part of this is state requirements. We have county funding that we go through. We have our probation fees. We charge probation fees to our offenders. And we have grants. So there's a combination of different funding options that come in to provide those services. Under the Department of Corrections, some of the counties have just Department of Corrections in their county for supervision services. Actually, in some of the presentations, the Department of Corrections has talked about is they say that those are just the base services. That's not my words. I want to make sure that I make it clear. Actually, they said that at an AMC meeting in September. When Department of Corrections is in the county, they're providing the base services. They don't do all the extras that we talked about, the different things. There's some counties that the Department of Corrections also contracts with to provide juvenile supervision and misdemeanor supervision. So it's a contract that the county pays the state to take care of those services. Then there's other counties where they have a separate county probation office that does adult misdemeanors and juvenile offenders. And then the Department of Corrections handles the felony. So they have 2 separate probation offices in their county. So it's kind of confusing why there's differences. Each county has the ability to change or do what they want. These systems were set up in 1950 and then 1976. And we'll see how, going forward, we're seeing a lot of counties actually choosing to move towards CCA in general so that they have a little bit more local control and that they have things going on. So in the last 4 years, 3 counties have switched from Department of Corrections to CCA. I will tell you that because of this funding problem, we are actually looking at, in the next couple of years, there's a couple of counties that are considering going back to Department of Corrections because we're so underfunded. They're concerned that this is not a formula that they can manage anymore. So it is something that we need to look at. I mean, we have the potential of going one way or the other based on funding. Okay, so here's my map that you can see. It's color-coded. CCA is the green. Department of Corrections is the blue. And the orange is where you have Department of Corrections and CPO, so County Probation Office and a Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections serves the felony caseloads, and then the County Probation serves the misdemeanor and juvenile caseloads. So it gives us a little bit of an idea where it's at. But you can also see that why, when we say that 72% of the offenders, the majority of the DOC counties you see in blue are the low populated counties, and by legislative requirements, they're not allowed to go into CCA without joining together. There's a population requirement. So smaller counties actually struggle a little bit trying to meet that and have to go in, they can't be standalone counties. So we see different places like Rock Nobles, they've joined together to meet the population requirement. They're CCA, but they're 2 counties together. So it's a little different than our system here being 1 county. So Community Corrections Act counties, like I said, so it's Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act counties. It started in 1976. We supervised 72% of the offenders, and we work towards our rehabilitative goals, all the things that we've been talking about. The main goal is enhancing public safety. So the purpose of CCA was developed in 1976 to enhance public safety. By accomplishing this, we use our local ideas in terms of how we're going to manage our probation populations or our supervised release. And remember, that's juvenile all the way through. So the probation office, our probation office supervises juvenile misdemeanors all the way up through people coming out of prison for murder and sexual offending. So there's a wide range of individuals that we provide services for, that we try and use evidence-based practices to move forward in reducing their recidivism, and supervised by a variety of different means to protect the public, in terms of the fact that sometimes not everybody's going to change. Right? As hard as we work to help people make those changes in their life, there's some of them that aren't. And in those cases, we're providing the supervision to make sure that we can protect the public the best that we can. So talking about Candido High Community Corrections, specifically tailoring our needs of our community. We provide adult probation, felony supervision, adult supervised release, that's what everybody typically knows as parole, adult misdemeanor supervision, juvenile supervision, adult pre-sentence investigations, juvenile predisposition reports. That includes domestic abuse assessments and sex offender evaluations. We've talked about some of those, some mental health things. We used evidence-based practices of risk and needs assessments, case planning, other rehabilitative services that we've talked about, cognitive programming, and then our work crews that I always love to talk about, all the different things we do in the community with our work crews. As part of this, we should talk about how our funding comes. Statewide funding for community supervision has not kept pace or level with the different things. I'm trying at some point, hopefully before I will have exact numbers for you over the last 10 years. I don't have them for you today, but showing you exactly how the funding has changed over the last 10 years or over time. Funding, there's requirement for the Department of Corrections for the state to provide some of the funding for our services. But it's also in their best interest too, because when we supervise these individuals in the community, a huge part of it is the fact that we're keeping them out of the jail, we're keeping them out of the prison system, and it actually costs us more and affects them in a more negative way to have them in those environments. So our services save the state money, and they tend to forget about that when they're sending money back. So at this point, it's very critical. Last year, and we talked about the fact that, so last year, the prison bed population was expected to go 1,000 beds over what it did. Part of that change was by policy change and how we kept those offenders in our communities across the state and supervised them effectively, kept them out of the jail and the prison process, but at the same time, that creates more work. I mean, we're supervising for the state and it creates more work, and we have to have some kind of back and forth. One of the things they're talking about is justice reinvestment as a possibility of trying to figure out how do we move the funds that we typically would spend on incarceration into community supervision, but we don't have a good transfer of those dollars yet at this point. So we're dependent on the state to push those dollars backwards towards us and figure out how do we provide that. So the model is very complex. We talked about the 3 delivery systems. How the money is divided between those 3 delivery systems is even more complex. One of the problems of last year, why we ran into such a big problem, not only have we not seen increases in our funding over the last couple of years, last year the Department of Corrections actually got an increase in their funding, but did not pass through any increases in our funding. It created gapping hole for us where we have cost of changes in our costs and things and cost of living increases and cost of benefits. And we didn't see any of the increase coming from the Department of Corrections. So when we talk about our changes in funding and requirements, we're asking for two things. We want us to look at an immediate action, immediate fix of 4% appropriation. We're asking in the supplemental budget for next year, for last year and next year, going forwards, to make up the funding gap that they missed just in this session. But the other piece of what we're looking at is really how do we fix this? The way that we're funded in the state of Minnesota is broken. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. It worked at one point to provide the funding, but right now, we're not seeing the increase. They don't pass the dollars on. And actually, even the Department of Corrections is saying, you know what, you're right. This system is not working we got to figure out a way to fix it. But they have their own obligations and things to do. So they understand that the problems are there. They just have to figure out a way to fix it as well. So we're asking for two things in our legislative agenda here on the funding is one is the 4% appropriation, and the two is to have a specific funding fix going forward so that we don't end up in this position again and again every year like we have been. As every year we miss this, we get further behind. And what that really means is it becomes a county responsibility instead of a state responsibility managing these offenders in our communities. Okay, so before I move on to our policy positions, do you have any questions about what we're talking about in terms of the supplemental budget we're asking for, the appropriation, and where these dollars come from or where they're going? I know I talked about it really fast.
Mr. Chair,
Roger, please.
I just want to see if I can break it down into a bit of a simple analysis. So they're reducing the prison population,
Yes,
which is part of Department of Corrections.
right,
So they've increased their budget. At the same time, the prison population has come down by 1,000.
right.
And those 1,000 people then get handed over to you
72%
to
of those
supervise
cases-
after they get released from prison, and your budget hasn't been increased. So their workload has gone down, and their budget has gone up. Your workload has gone up, and your budget has remained flat.
Correct. Very succinct, probably much more succinct way of explaining it.
The reimbursement is flat, but the budget has gone up because it's local dollars.
Yes.
Right.
That's the fact. That's the fact.
Good distinction.
And that is why it's so important for us to stay on top of this, is the fact that we can't ignore these problems. I mean, this is a public safety issue. It really is a public safety, it's a human issue. We are choosing as a community and to set this as a priority and make sure that we keep our community safe by supervising these individuals and working on recidivism. The problem is the state's just not keeping up with their fair share. I mean, they're just not keeping up.
Well, just
Proceed
one
with the
comment.
policies.
But just one quick comment. It seems to me, I don't know how this all got started. It changed in 1930, then 1978, and, you know, and slowly, I suppose they tried, or I'm assuming they tried different experiments in different areas to see which would work out better, you know, whether it be the Department of Corrections, you know, whoever managed it in their own fashion. Like Meeker County is different than Candiac County, the probation officers there. You know, what's working, and so they split everything up, which made it much more complicated. I agree that you're on the right track. I support what you're trying to do to simplify it, but the funding issue is of course, our biggest concern, and delivering the service and recidivism. Thank you.
Proceed with the policies, please.
Okay, so just talking a little bit about some of the policies. I mean, the main ones that we talked about are supporting expansion of CCA. We, as a community corrections organization, of course, are self-serving, and we want everybody to be community corrections. It's just the way it is. But we do firmly believe, I believe, that's one of the reasons I came here a year and a half ago, is community corrections is, in my opinion, the best system that we could possibly use, because of the fact that we have the ability to move forward and do a lot of different things based on where we're at. And it's a public safety factor to me. Again, the structural change is part of our policy things. Future funding should be allocated using an equitable and transparent model that considers the need of each county. That We look at this across the board, across the state, so each county gets funding the same instead of it based on whatever type of supervision or system that you're choosing to use. Justice reinvestment is a statewide research process and looking at how do we pull people out of prisons and jails and put them in the community. Okay, so these are they're way too small probably for you to read. I do have them on our policy page that I will hand out. So what these are is probation links. As we've talked about, and I think we had some questions about MACAC, right now it recognizes that we need to have a discussion about probation links. There's places in the state where we see people placed on probation for 30 and 40 years. This is not effective supervision. It actually costs us money, and it creates a lot of problems for individuals. And if you can imagine, if you were 18 years old and were faced with 30 years of probation, it'd be pretty daunting. There are individuals that may require it, but those are far and few between. And this actual position was actually brought forward by the County Attorneys Association last year, and we just, as part of our policy, have said that we would support it. Juvenile life without parole. This is an interesting one in terms of the fact that it stays on our policy page because it's important to address, but it's actually case law. So the Supreme Court actually said that we cannot have juvenile life without parole, but we still have it on our books. And it's just a matter of, there's no argument against it. It's just somebody has to go in and change it. Okay, so we keep that as a policy position. We don't see this in the state of Minnesota. We can't because, again, it was a Supreme Court case a couple years ago that said you can't do that. Juvenile justice reform, we're looking at eliminating racial and ethnic disparities, reducing collateral consequences, a lot of things we talk about that prohibit or make it difficult for kids to actually make changes in their lives. Restoration of voting rights. This one can be a little contentious sometimes because some people have a lot of varying opinions. I would tell you that my opinion and that of MACAC has to do with the cost. The amount of work we're putting into making sure, right now, because it says that a felony person under probation can't vote, my staff spend an enormous amount of time notifying people, investigating, making sure that they don't vote. And when they should probably be spending more time doing other things of reducing recidivism and addressing public safety. It isn't an opinion about whether somebody should or shouldn't vote. It has to do with the cost that we spend prosecuting, going through the process and making sure somebody doesn't vote. Is that where we want to put our resources? Pretrial services, as we talked about, bail studies and different things came forward last year, and there's a lot of changes, and we're looking at standardizing the assessments. It's another thing that, the courts and the county attorney's office and other people are trying to address. And then sex offender supervision strategies. So, anybody have any questions about those as I'm running out of time? So I went through them really, really fast.
I would just have, maybe a couple questions. What can we do to help as a county board? I mean, we talked to our legislators, that's obvious. What can we do to help move this forward?
Okay, so as I said, I'm on the legislative committee. One of the things, we're going to do a bunch of things this year. We're gearing up, actually in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be meeting with multiple different people in terms of the Department of Corrections, having a unified voice with the county probation offices, the Department of Corrections and community corrections offices going forward, trying to address some of these issues in funding. We're talking to our legislators. This is really where it comes down to, we need a legislative fix for this. We need that supplemental budget. We need the short term and the long term. We're meeting with different people in different groups and trying to talk about making sure that people know what probation does. One of the things that we find is people don't even know what probation is. If we don't talk about it a lot, we spent many, many years kind of hiding and saying, we want to stay away from the public eye. And we've got to change that conversation and move forward and show how important it is, because if probation isn't there, it dramatically impacts public safety. And so we need to get that message out. So just talking and telling people how important this is to you. Last week, as part of our district meetings at AMC, we voted this as being one of the top priorities. That's a huge start. So talking to the people that need to hear the story. Going to the legislature when we have our hearings and voicing our opinion about how this affects our counties and our communities. There's lots of different ways we can get at it.
Further questions?
I have a question regarding the 30-year cases. You said in some cases 30 years, they would 30 years of probation. It's a long time. But I suppose it depends on what type of case, and I'm assuming that most of those cases, please correct me if I'm wrong, are related to sex offenders,
Actually, a lot of those cases are drug cases,
or what?
drug cases.
Drug cases?
Yep. I
Okay.
mean, there, you have lifetime supervision for some sex offenses. Those are not what we're talking about when we're talking about probation lengths. Actually, those are off the table. We're talking about the other types of offenses. And just one of the things I forgot to mention is research. Again, when we go back to our evidence-based practices and research, they say that there's a diminishing return at the point of probation. So probation can be super successful in helping people change their lives, and we can provide intensive services, but about the point of 3, 4 years, definitely by the time you hit 6, 7 years on probation, it's kind of a diminishing return. The longer they're on probation, the less effective probation actually becomes. We're putting our resources, it's really about where do we put our resources that have the biggest bang for the buck, is really what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Any administrative updates other than the policies? Anything further, Tammy?
Nope, I don't believe so.
Jenny, anything update that you have at this point? Stand adjourned. Thank you.